Hi, this is Jamey with Stonemaier Games, and today I'm going to talk about my favorite route and network building games. This is a category that I honestly have not thought all that much about, despite the number of games that I'll share on my list today. But about a month ago, a friend hosted a route and network and train game day, and so pretty much all the games we played that day were themed around trains and route building and network building, and I kind of realized how much I enjoy these games. I think I've known this for a while, but I haven't quite thought about how many games fit into this category. So today I'm going to talk about my favorites, obviously, why I like each of those from the perspective of the route and network building aspect of them. There's a little survey link in the video below that's unrelated to this that I'll explain at the end of the video. And most importantly, just to define what route and network building is, it's in a tabletop game where the connections between things on a map matter. And the connections are the key part here, because there are plenty of games that have you placing, say, buildings on a map, perhaps for area control, perhaps to trigger different bonuses for the cities or the places where you're putting them. An example of this would be Orleans. But in Orleans, the connection between those houses doesn't matter, at least not in the core game that I recall. Hopefully I'm not messing that up. So it matters where you put them and that you have houses down somewhere on the map, but really the connections between them don't matter at all, either during the game or at the end of the game for endgame scoring. It's just the number of houses you have out there. And another kind of similar example that could be confused would be a game like Clank, where there are routes and networks that you're moving throughout the game, but you're not actually building them. They are pre-built into the board from the very beginning. You're not putting anything on those tracks that create connections during the game, and you're not establishing those tracks during the game. So with that definition in mind, let me mention some honorable mentions real quick that didn't quite make my top 10, but they are really wonderful route building games. They are Power Grid, Trains, Hermagor, Brass, all the varieties of Brass, Settlers of Catan, especially with Cities and Knights. That's a variety of Catan that I enjoy playing. Near and Far, Karuba, and The Cave. Now I'll get on to my top 10. I own, about 6 of these games, so you actually get some visuals today. My number 10 is Council of Four. This is a game that I actually only played once, but the route building was really, really interesting in it, because whenever you place a building, I can't even remember what you place on the route, influence building, something like that. Whenever you place it on part of your route on the board, you trigger the abilities of every city along that route. So it feels really good whenever you place a building along a route that you've already established. And every time you place another building along that route, it feels even better and better, because you're chaining all these combos together, all these bonuses together from that route. So I really like that approach to route building. That's definitely my favorite aspect of Council of Four, that when you place those buildings, you trigger bonuses for every city along that route that you control or that you have a building on. So that is Council of Four, my number 10. My number 9 is Hansa Teutonica. This one probably could have been higher on the list. This one varies depending on my mood. Hansa is a wonderful engine building game where you are doing a couple different types of route building. One of them is that you are trying to connect one side of the board to the other. That's a big way to score points in the game. And another is just kind of the core aspect of the game. You're kind of placing essentially what amounts to workers on the board to activate different abilities and to gain ownership of certain areas. But your connections in the game matter, both for that end game scoring and for some other things that I'm blanking on right now. I won't go into it. I won't spend too much time on Hansa. That's the thing about Hansa. I always forget exactly how to play until I actually sit down and play it. It's been a few months since I played it. Number 8 is Terra Mystica. Let me dig this one out from my pile here. Terra Mystica is one of my favorite games, and originally I didn't even think about it being on this list because you're not connecting like road segments in Terra Mystica, but at the end of the game, the connections between your empire really matter. You are definitely trying to connect things in Terra Mystica, because if you don't, they're not worth any points at the end of the game. You're not going to compete for a majority at the end of the game. So in Terra Mystica, let's see. I'm going to use the bottom of the boxes today to show you what it looks like. In Terra Mystica, you are terraforming and placing buildings on this this map, and you need to connect things to form cities during the game, and at the end of the game, you are trying to generally have the largest connected empire. And with the expansion, there are also some variants to how those connections work. Like you might want to, there's variants based on that. But Terra Mystica is one of my favorite games, one of my favorite engine building games in terms of the route building, because it's not as big of a core focus. I put it a little bit lower on this list at number 8. Let me put this aside. This is a heavy game. Number 7 is Rajas of the Ganges. This is another one that I didn't initially think of as route building, but on these player mats that you have in the game, the one rule that you have when you're placing these tiles, and a bunch of the game is built around getting these tiles and placing them on your mats, the one rule you have is that they need to connect back to your palace by roads. And whenever you place any of these tiles, see these the kind of the design on the edges of the board? Whenever you place a road that connects one of these little icons all the way back to your palace by road, you get that bonus. As you place the tile, you get that bonus in the corner of the board. So it's really, really gratifying during the game to not only get the bonuses on the tiles that you place, but also connect these things on the edges back to the palace. This is one of my favorite route building mechanisms because it's so satisfying. It's that double bonus that I love in games, that it's the tile you place and you're connecting these things. And the bonuses get better the farther away from your palace you go. So you're kind of deciding, it feels a little bit like a tech tree too, because you're deciding, okay, am I going to connect all the way down to here, or am I going to go this way? And once you start to choose one of those paths, it's going to take you longer to get to the other tech bonus at the bottom of the other path. So Rajas of the Ganges, really, really fun route building mechanism. And one of the unique things about that too is that it shows that route building doesn't need to happen on a shared space. It can happen on a private space like a player mat instead of a shared board. Number 6 is Carcassonne. Carcassonne is another one that I do have here. Carcassonne is one that, you know, I don't think I need to explain Carcassonne. Most people have played this game. But one of the interesting things about this game is that it's a competitive game, and yet the routes that you're building are often shared by other players, or at least whenever you place a tile that grows one of the routes on the board, the roads on the board, if you don't place a meeple on that road, you are likely helping out another player who might eventually place a meeple on that road and then pull it off later to get a bunch of points depending on how long that road is. So I kind of like that aspect in Carcassonne, that it's a competitive game, but you have positive player interactions in terms of the tiles that you're placing on the board. Although there can also be negative player interactions as well, but most of them are positive in Carcassonne. My number 5, we'll do the top 5 here. Number 5 is Isle of Skye, which again is one of my favorite games. Similar to Rajas of the Ganges, you are creating your own private route in terms of the tiles that you're placing. The only reason I didn't place this even higher on the list, because I really do love this game, is that the route building in the game is mainly connected, well, it's connected to 2 things. One is the income that you receive every round is determined by the number of barrels on roads that connect back to your castle. So that's one thing. It's very important to get that income. And the other reason is there are sometimes end game bonus, or during the game bonus scoring tiles that relate to that route, but not always. It's only sometimes, and that's why I didn't place it higher on the list, because it's so variable, which is one of my favorite things about the game. That in Isle of Skye, the scoring tiles vary widely from game to game, and depending on the order they're in. But in some games, the route building won't really play a big role at all, other than income. So that's Isle of Skye, my number 4. Oh, my number 5. My number 4, I don't own. A friend owns the anniversary edition of Ticket to Ride, one of the classic route building games. And this is one that, at first glance, it kind of looks like a game like Clank, where the routes are already printed on the board. But what really matters here is you connecting those routes with trains. I really love in Ticket to Ride that the types of player interaction that are in the game, because you can be direct with other players, but you don't really know what they're going after. And unless they really show it very visibly on the board that they've left maybe a connection point over here, and they haven't connected the part in the middle, which I have done in the game several times and gotten screwed over for it. My own fault, though. I left that connection open. So there's a bit of bluffing that almost goes on when you're hiding the routes that you want to complete in Ticket to Ride from other players, trying to keep that information from other players. And so on the other side of it, it's rarely direct player interaction. You're not really conflicting with other players directly. Usually, when you place trains on the board, it's because you need to. You need to put them there. You're not doing it to hurt another player necessarily. There are exceptions to that. It does happen. But I think the game is structured around not directly targeting specific players, and I really, really like that. Yeah, Ticket to Ride, that's my number 4. My number 3 is Summit, and I believe this is the only cooperative game on the list. I mentioned the cave in the honorable mentions, but in Summit, here's a good example here. In Summit, you are building a route up a mountain, competitively or cooperatively. I've only played the cooperative version because I like it so much, using these tiles. And so instead of using kind of a flat version of the world, bird's eye view, you are climbing up a mountain. So this is your route up the mountain. And the tiles that you place might have different hazards on them, but you have control over the tiles that you place. This isn't a random thing that you put out on the board. You are determining the route that you're building up this mountain with the goal of just getting one player in the cooperative play, getting one player to the summit and getting them down the mountain. So there's a ton of interesting choices that go into trying to get that player up the mountain, and where you place these tiles, and having backup paths so that when events come up that destroy some of those tiles, that you have a backup way to get that player down. And even better in Summit, there's also the leapfrogging mechanism, which is when there's another player along that route, you can jump over them as if there was no space there. So not only are the tiles themselves building the route, but the players themselves, the pawns, are a big part of that route throughout the game, and making that route easy for other players to get up and down the mountain. It is a truly brilliant mechanism that I think is truly thematic as well. That's cooperative play with Summit. That is my number 3. My number 2 is On Tour, one of my new top 10 games. I've still been really, really enjoying On Tour. It's a delightful game to play. And in On Tour, the game is building the route. This is a roll and write game where you roll some dice, and then all players on their player mats, let me see if I can show you here. Yeah, they have a map of the US here that looks like that. All players will write down 2 numbers. So if I roll an 81, all players will write down an 18 and an 81 somewhere on this map, with the intent at the end of the game, building your route of drawing lines through cities in ascending order to create the longest route. So everything you do in the game is built around that idea that you are creating a route, one single route. It's the entire game. And that's why it's not only is it really fun, but that's why it's so high on my list, because the entire game is the route building. And throughout the entire game, I love that a big part of the game is about backup plans. Like, how can you mitigate the luck? Because there is a lot of luck in the roll of the dice. But all players are subject to that same luck. And so throughout the game, you're really just trying to mitigate that luck in terms of having backup routes. Like, okay, if I don't ever see another number in the 40s, how do I work around that? How do I still get from my 37 up to my 51? How do I do that? But how do I also leave spaces open so if I do get a bunch of 40s, I can benefit by extending my route in that way? Wonderful game. That is On Tour, my number 2. My number 1 I don't own, but it is Railways of the World. And I think I've only played the Railways of the Eastern US version. This is a massive epic game. And by massive, I mean that the board literally takes up an entire table. It is a huge board. And it is so satisfying to place routes on this board and to ship things from one route to another. It's an amazing game. It's a wonderful game. This is Railways of the World. I'm at a loss for words right now as to how good it is. But I just love that you have this map, and there's so many places that you can go. It uses hexes on the board, so there aren't any prescribed routes on the board. You have to build them yourself using hexes that you place on the board, and by not only creating these connections between cities, but creating the right connections between the cities, because cities are randomly, there are random tokens placed on cities at the beginning of the game that determine if it's what goods that you want to ship to or from that city. So not only are you building the routes, but you're like actively using the routes during the game. I love it. That's Railways of the World, my #1 route and network building game. So I mentioned a survey at the beginning of this post. Actually, before I get to that, let me say, I really want to hear your thoughts about route and network building games. So if you have different favorites, I'd love to hear your top 5, your top 3, your top 10. I'd love to hear that in the comments. Or if you have comments about any of the games I've mentioned today that you find interesting, any interesting mechanisms that you find in them in relation to the route or network building, I'd love to hear about that in the comments. And now that survey, I'm going to a convention called Geekway to the West here in St. Louis in about a month now. It's April 14th now. So yeah, it's almost exactly a month in May. If you are attending, my whole reason for attending Geekway is to play new-to-me games with people that I don't normally get to play games with. So I just walk around and play games with random people for 4 days. And currently I have a list of 30 games that I'm targeting, new-to-me games that I'm targeting. And I need to really whittle it down to about 10. Ideally, I will actually be able to play 20 of them, but I want to target 10 of them specifically. And I've been pretty wishy-washy on which ones I played, and many of them have gotten on this list thanks to you, you people who are listening to this video and commenting on this video. You've mentioned games that you love and respect and like, and I've added them to my list. But now I need to whittle it down to 10. So if you want to take a minute, there's a survey where you can kind of vote on the top 10 games that I should play at Geekway for the first time. And also on the list, I put some games that maybe I should avoid. And you can completely ignore that question if you want. I don't really like speaking negatively about games. But because my time is precious at this convention, I only have 4 days, probably like 10 hours a day at the convention, I need to use that time wisely. So if there are any games that you really recommend or don't recommend, you can indicate that on the survey. Thanks so much for doing that, and thanks for listening to this video, and thanks for commenting if you choose to do so. I will see you on Tuesday with my favorite game mechanism video. Take care. Have a good weekend.